I was 7 when it happened, but even now, more than a decade later, I still remember every detail. My bedroom was at the back of the house, facing the woods. Just a few feet beyond our yard, the trees stretched deep, twisting together into a wall of blackness at night. During the day, it was just a regular forest, birds, deer, the occasional rabbit. But at night, it felt different, like something could be standing just beyond the trees, watching. I used to tell myself it was all in my head, that the shadows moving across my walls were just branches swaying in the wind, that the soft creaks and rustling outside were animals, nothing more. But then came the night that proved me right. I don't know why I woke up. Maybe it was the cold. The room felt wrong, like the temperature had dropped suddenly. My nightlight flickered, casting weird, jerky shadows across my walls. And then I turned over. I wish I hadn't, because he was there, standing outside my window. A clown. His face was pressed against the glass, his white paint cracked and peeling like old wallpaper. His lips were drawn into this huge, unnatural grin, smeared red paint stretching across his face. He wore one of those old-school circus suits, red and yellow, with ruffles around the collar. The fabric was filthy, stained like he had been dragging himself through the dirt. And he wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me. His head was tilted slightly, like he was studying me, waiting for something. His eyes were wide and empty, painted black around the edges, making them look even more hollow. I remember lying there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't even blink. It felt like if I looked away, even for a second, he would move. Then he raised his hand, and he tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. That was when I broke. I launched myself out of bed and bolted down the hall to my parents' room, slamming into their door so hard it rattled. My dad jolted awake, groggy and annoyed at first, but when he saw my face, his expression changed. He grabbed the baseball bat from beside the dresser, told me to stay put, and headed outside with a flashlight. I waited in the hallway, every muscle in my body tense, barely breathing. I wanted to hear something, footsteps running away, a struggle, anything. But it was silent, the kind of silence that felt wrong, like the whole world was holding its breath. After a few minutes, my dad came back in. He said there was nothing there, no footprints in the damp grass, no sign of anyone near my window. They told me it was a nightmare, that I must have imagined it, but I knew better. Because the next morning when the sun was finally up, I forced myself to go back to my room. I needed to see. I hesitated before looking out the window, half expecting to see him still standing there. But he was gone, and in his place, sitting just beneath the glass, was a single red balloon, half deflated, tied to a stick, like a message, like a promise. I never slept in that room again. I told my mom what happened. She listened, nodding along, but I could tell she didn't believe me. She did that thing parents do when they don't want to outright call you a liar. Soft voice, reassuring smile, gentle hand on my shoulder. "It was just a bad dream," she said. "Your dad checked, honey. There was no one there." I pointed to the balloon. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she forced a smile and scooped it up like it was nothing, untying it from the stick and tossing it into the trash. There, all gone. Like that solved everything. But I could tell she was weirded out. Later, I overheard her whispering to my dad in the kitchen. I couldn't make out all of it, but I caught Could have been some sicko messing around, and should we call someone? My dad brushed it off. If there were no footprints, there was no one there, he said. That was the end of it. For them. I tried to forget about it. Tried to convince myself they were right. That maybe I had just been half dreaming, my mind playing tricks on me. But that feeling, that deep, sickening certainty, never left. I knew what I saw. And a week later, I saw him again. It was a Saturday night. My parents had gone to a friend's house for dinner, leaving me home alone for the first time since the incident. They asked if I wanted to come, but I told them no. I was fine. The house felt too quiet without them. Every little sound stood out. The hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the walls settling. I left the TV on just for the noise, flipping through channels without really watching anything. Then the power flickered. Just once. A quick stutter of the lights, enough to make my stomach tighten. I told myself it was nothing, but my body didn't believe me. My skin felt cold. My fingers shook a little when I reached for the remote. And then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. At the front door this time. I froze, remote clutched in my hands. It was soft, almost polite, but deliberate. 3 slow taps. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. Then, another sound. A low, muffled giggle. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was in the hallway, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The front door had a small window at the top, just high enough that a tall person could look through. And just like before, he was there, the clown. But this time, he wasn't standing still. He was swaying slightly, rocking side to side, like he was barely holding in his excitement. His hands were out of sight, but I could see his shoulders shaking, like he was laughing to himself. My stomach lurched. I backed away, step by step, keeping my eyes locked on the window. Then, his head tilted slowly to the side, like he had just noticed me, like he was waiting for me to do something. My hands shook as I reached for the phone. I could barely press the numbers, but I managed to dial my dad. The ringing felt like it went on forever. Finally, he picked up. "Dad," I whispered. "Someone's here." I could hear the shift in his voice immediately. The concern, the tension. Who? The clown. Silence. Then, fast movement on the other end. A chair scraping, my mom asking what was wrong, the sound of keys jingling. "We're coming now, don't move, don't go near the door." I stood there, gripping the phone so hard my fingers ached. The clown hadn't moved. He was still rocking, like he had all the time in the world. Then, without warning, he lifted one hand, a slow, deliberate motion. He waved at me, then he turned and walked away. Not hurried, not scared, just casual, like he had already gotten what he came for. My parents pulled up 5 minutes later. My dad tore through the yard, checked the entire street, but there was no one there. Nothing. Just like last time. But I know what I saw, and when I went to bed that night, there was something new waiting for me outside my window. A small, dirt-streaked clown doll, sitting right where the balloon had been, waiting. It was my cousin's 7th birthday. A backyard party full of kids running around, laughing, stuffing their faces with cake. The kind of day that should be completely ordinary. Until the clown showed up. No one saw where he came from. 1 minute we were playing and the next, he was just there, standing near the fence, watching the party. His costume was old, faded, the fabric stained in places like it had been rained on too many times. His face paint was cracked, peeling at the edges. His smile was wide, too wide. But the thing that unsettled me the most was his eyes. They weren't playful or goofy like I expected from a birthday clown. They were flat, empty. He didn't say anything. He just started performing. He pulled out a handful of balloons, twisted them into shapes, dogs, swords, flowers. One by one, the kids took them, thrilled. The parents, thinking he was just some hired entertainment, laughed and clapped along. But something was wrong. I watched my aunt's face as she whispered to my uncle, her expression slowly shifting from amusement to concern. I heard my mom ask, "Did you hire a clown?" No one had. The clown had invited himself. My uncle, trying to be polite, walked over and asked where he was from. The clown didn't answer. He just smiled. Then, without a word, he turned, walked to the fence, climbed over it in one smooth motion, and disappeared into the trees. We never saw him again. But here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. When we checked the balloons he had given out, each one had a name written on it. Not the kids' names, our names, even the adults, even mine, in smeared childlike handwriting. We still don't know how he knew them. After the party, my aunt and uncle tried to play it off like it was nothing. They told us it was probably some mix-up, maybe a local performer who thought he was booked but had the wrong address. But the way they kept glancing at each other, the way my mom wouldn't stop rubbing her arms like she was trying to shake off a chill, I could tell they didn't believe that. None of us did. I couldn't stop thinking about the balloons. Every single one had our names written on them, not the kids' names, not happy birthday or anything generic. Our names, the parents, the family, even mine. And the writing, it wasn't neat. It looked rushed, sloppy, like a little kid had scrawled it out in a hurry. The clown never spoke, not once, just performed, watched, smiled, and when my uncle asked him who hired him, he just left, climbing over the fence like it was the most normal thing in the world. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. And the next day, my aunt found something in the backyard, a balloon. It was still fully inflated, tied to the fence, bobbing slightly in the breeze. She thought maybe one had blown back from the party, but when she walked over and grabbed it, she saw the name written across the rubber in thick, uneven black marker. It was hers. She popped it immediately. She called my mom after, trying to laugh it off, but she was shaken. My mom was too. The whole thing left this lingering unease over everyone, like the party had ended, but something about it hadn't really been put to rest. For a while, nothing else happened. Then one night, my cousin woke up screaming. When my aunt ran into his room, he was curled under his blankets, shaking so hard he couldn't even get words out. When she finally calmed him down, all he could say was, "The clown. He was at my window." She told him it was a nightmare, that the clown was long gone. But the next morning, when my uncle went outside, he saw something in the dirt beneath my cousin's bedroom window. A footprint, just one, perfectly centered beneath the window, facing inward, like someone had been standing there, watching. The print was strange, too long, the arch too high. But what made it even worse, the front of the footprint was rounded, like a clown shoe. And they called the police. There wasn't much they could do. No signs of forced entry. Nothing caught on the cameras at the front of the house. They checked the backyard fence, but there was no sign of anyone climbing over it. The official report said it was probably just an animal print, but my uncle knew better. And so did I. Because 2 nights later, when I got up to get a glass of water, I happened to glance out our kitchen window, and in the middle of our yard, half hidden by the darkness, stood a single balloon, not tied to anything, just sitting there, like it had been left for us, like he wasn't finished yet. When I was 13, we moved into an old house just outside town. It wasn't fancy, but it was big. And the best part? It had a finished basement that I got to use as my own room. I was thrilled. At first, the basement had a small door on the far wall, one of those low wooden crawlspace doors. My parents told me not to mess with it. Just storage, they said. Nothing interesting in there. But I hated that door. It was always colder near it, even when the heat was on. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear noises. A faint scratching sound, like something shifting inside. One night, I woke up to a soft thumping sound, slow, repetitive, coming from inside the crawl space. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, staring at the door, willing myself to go back to sleep. But then, the sound changed. It wasn't thumping anymore. It was giggling. Low, breathy, just on the other side of the door. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told my dad. He sighed, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the crawl space door to show me there was nothing in there. Dust, some old boxes, cobwebs. But as he swept the flashlight around, he suddenly froze. His face went pale. He didn't say anything, just slammed the door shut, locked it, and muttered something about old junk from the previous owners before telling me to never go near it again. Years later, after we had moved out, I asked him about that day. At first he brushed it off, but after some pushing, he finally admitted it. Behind the boxes, pushed up against the far wall, he had seen something. A single wooden chair, and on that chair, sitting perfectly upright, was a clown doll. It wasn't dusty. It wasn't covered in cobwebs. It had been placed there, like someone had been sitting there, watching me sleep. After my dad saw the clown doll in the crawl space, he never talked about it again. He locked the door, shoved a heavy dresser in front of it, and told me to forget about it. But how the hell do you forget something like that? I could tell it shook him. I had never seen him move that fast, never seen him that pale. But when I tried to ask, he just cut me off, told me the basement was too cold for me to be sleeping down there anyway, that I should take the upstairs guest room instead. I didn't argue. I wanted to be as far away from that door as possible. For a while, things were normal. At least, they seemed that way. I moved upstairs, tried to convince myself that maybe it was just some old toy left behind by the previous owners, that the noises I'd been hearing, the scratching, the shifting, were just mice. But something in the house still felt off. Even during the day, it was too quiet. The air was always just a little too cold, like the house itself was holding its breath. I'd wake up some nights with the feeling that something was watching me, like I wasn't alone in my own room. And then came the night that proved I wasn't. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just that something had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. A slow dragging noise coming from the basement. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, every instinct telling me to stay put. But the sound didn't stop. It wasn't just coming from below me. It was coming from inside the walls. A slow, deliberate movement, shifting through the crawl space like something was dragging itself along the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my sheets, telling myself I was imagining it, that it was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, making me hear things that weren't really there. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound came from inside my closet. I stopped breathing. The closet door was shut, had been shut all night, but something had just knocked from the other side. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream for my dad, but I couldn't move. Then, knock, knock, knock. And this time, a giggle. Low, breathless. Right. Outside. The door. I shot out of bed, nearly tripping over myself as I stumbled into the hallway. My dad's door was already swinging open. He must have heard it too. The second he saw my face, he knew. He turned without a word, rushed down to the basement, and shoved the dresser away from the crawlspace door. It was unlocked, but it hadn't been before. He yanked it open and shined his flashlight inside. I stood behind him, every muscle locked, waiting for something to lunge out. Nothing, just empty space, cold air, and dust. Except the chair was gone. The chair where he had seen the clown doll. And the worst part? At the back of the crawl space, where the dust should have been undisturbed, there was a trail. A long, dragged line through the dirt, leading straight to the air vent on the far wall. A vent that was just big enough for something to squeeze through. We moved a month later. My dad wouldn't admit that was the reason, but I knew. He had always been stubborn, always brushed things off, but after that night, he refused to go into the basement again. The house sat empty for a while before new owners moved in. I don't know what happened after that. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when I wake up for no reason, I remember that sound, that slow dragging inside the walls, that giggle behind the door, and I wonder if whoever lives there now has started hearing it too.